Have you ever thought about what happens when the person who always needed to feel in charge suddenly realizes they no longer have control over anything? What happens when someone who appeared fearless, confident, and completely unaffected is forced to face a situation they never expected? Because this moment reveals something important about narcissistic behavior that many people overlook. Losing control can become one of the most emotionally overwhelming experiences for a narcissistic person, because control is not just something they prefer. It often becomes something they depend on to protect their sense of identity, importance, and emotional security. In many relationships, they become used to knowing exactly how the other person will react. They expect attention, access, emotional responses, forgiveness, and the belief that the other person will always remain available. As time passes, this predictable pattern can create a strong feeling of power. They begin to assume that regardless of what they say or do, the other person will continue to stay emotionally connected and within their influence. But when someone finally chooses to step away, creates healthy boundaries, and refuses to return to the old pattern, that feeling of certainty begins to disappear. Suddenly, the narcissistic person can no longer understand what the other individual is thinking, feeling, or planning. They cannot easily control conversations, create emotional reactions, or guide the story of what happened between them. This sudden loss of influence can create deep discomfort because it takes away a psychological support system they may have relied on for a long time. And here is where things become very revealing. The narcissistic person may not see another person's independence as something healthy. Instead, they may experience it as a personal threat. When the former partner becomes emotionally stronger, starts making choices without seeking approval, and no longer depends on their validation, the narcissist faces a reality they may struggle to accept. They are no longer the main focus of that person's emotional life. This realization can lead to frustration, anger, confusion, anxiety, constant thoughts about the situation, and attempts to reconnect or regain influence. The pain is often not only about losing the relationship itself, it can also come from losing control over attention, access, and emotional responses. When that control disappears, hidden insecurities and fears may begin to appear beneath the confident image they worked so hard to maintain. The reason this experience can feel so intense is because a narcissistic identity is often strongly connected to outside validation. The image they show to the world may look powerful, independent, and completely secure, but that appearance can depend heavily on how others respond to them. Compliments, admiration, recognition, attention, and emotional reactions can become signals that they are valuable, important, admired, or in control. When those signals suddenly stop, they may experience a painful internal emptiness that they were not prepared to face. The person who once felt certain about their ability to influence others now has to deal with a situation where their usual methods no longer work. The silence becomes louder, the distance becomes more noticeable. The absence of emotional reactions becomes something they cannot easily ignore. This is why losing access to someone who once provided constant attention can feel deeply unsettling. It forces them to confront a reality where they are no longer receiving the same level of reassurance from another person. The most interesting part is that the person who walks away often does not need to fight, argue, or prove anything. Their calmness, consistency, and emotional independence can communicate more than any confrontation ever could. A person who once reacted to every action may now respond with peace. A person who once searched for answers may now focus on rebuilding their own life. And that change can become extremely difficult for someone who is used to having emotional influence. Pay close attention to this moment because it reveals the difference between someone who has lost control and someone who has found themselves again. When a person stops being controlled by fear, guilt, or the need for approval, the entire dynamic changes. The power that once existed through emotional reactions begins to disappear. What remains is a person who is no longer waiting for permission to choose peace, growth, and self-respect. Instead of building a stable feeling of self-worth from inside, they may depend heavily on other people to repeatedly confirm their value. This need for outside validation can influence many parts of their life. In relationships, they may constantly look for reassurance, admiration, attention, or emotional investment from their partner. In social situations, they can become deeply focused on their reputation, appearance, achievements, and the way others perceive them. Even small criticism that many people could easily accept may feel like a serious attack because it threatens the image they have worked so hard to protect. Praise and approval can strengthen the identity they want to display, while rejection, emotional distance, or a lack of admiration can create intense inner discomfort. When someone who once provided constant validation decides to walk away, the narcissistic person may experience more than the ending of a connection. They may also feel the loss of a powerful source of emotional reinforcement that supported the way they viewed themselves. Suddenly, the attention, compliments, emotional reactions, and availability they once expected are no longer certain. This sudden change can create feelings of insecurity, frustration, anxiety, and sometimes an intense focus on getting that connection back. They may look for new people to provide validation, attempt to restore old sources of attention, or become determined to prove their importance to others. The deeper struggle is not simply about wanting to be noticed. The real issue is the dependence on external approval to maintain a sense of identity, importance, and emotional balance when deeper insecurities begin to surface. And this is where the silence of no contact becomes extremely powerful. No contact creates a difficult psychological situation because it removes many of the pathways through which a narcissistic person may have maintained awareness, influence, and emotional control. In many relationships, they become used to having access to the other person's thoughts, emotions, reactions, and everyday experiences. Whether through direct messages, social media updates, mutual connections, or even ongoing arguments, these interactions can provide information and reassurance that they still have a meaningful place in that person's life. Even anger, frustration, or emotional reactions can still feel like proof that a connection exists. But when no contact is created and maintained, that source of information suddenly disappears. The narcissistic person no longer knows what the other individual is doing, how they are feeling, who they are spending time with, or whether they are still thinking about the past relationship. This uncertainty can become deeply uncomfortable because it removes the predictability they once relied on. The person who used to feel emotionally available now feels distant and unreachable, and that lack of access can create growing curiosity, frustration, and emotional tension. Pay attention to this part because silence can reveal what words often hide. Without communication, they cannot easily measure their impact, seek reassurance, protect their image, or control how the story is being understood. They may start questioning whether they have been forgotten, replaced, or completely removed from the other person's life. The absence of a response can sometimes feel more disturbing than direct rejection because there is no conversation to influence and no reaction to manage. They are left facing uncertainty without the usual tools they depended on. As a result, no contact can force them to experience emotions they may have previously avoided. The inability to monitor, convince, trigger, or regain access can lead to anxiety, anger, repeated thoughts about the situation, and attempts to reopen communication. The pressure comes from losing two things at the same time: information and influence. And when both disappear, the old relationship pattern can no longer continue in the same way. The ego begins to weaken when the carefully created image a narcissistic person has built can no longer be continuously supported by the reality around them. A large part of their emotional stability may depend on believing that they are special, attractive, significant, powerful, or always in control. This personal image often works like a protective barrier that hides deeper feelings of insecurity, shame, weakness, inadequacy, or emotional vulnerability. As long as they continue receiving attention, admiration, approval, validation, or cooperation from others, that barrier remains strong, and the hidden doubts stay covered. But when an important source of validation disappears, especially when someone chooses to leave and no longer participates in the old pattern, weaknesses can begin to appear in that carefully maintained identity. The narcissistic person may start facing situations that challenge the beliefs they have held about themselves for a long time. The person they were certain would return does not come back. The individual they believed could not move on begins creating a life without them. The influence they once felt confident about slowly becomes weaker or disappears completely. These moments create a painful contradiction between the version of themselves they believe in and the reality they are now experiencing. And this is where the internal struggle becomes more visible. The mind begins searching for answers to questions they would rather avoid. If they truly had complete power, why can they no longer change the outcome? If they were impossible to forget, why is someone else finding peace without them? If they were truly in control, why does the other person no longer respond the same way? These thoughts can create deep emotional discomfort because they challenge the strong self-image that helps them feel secure. This is a moment many people misunderstand, so pay close attention. The reaction is often not only about losing a person, it is also about facing the collapse of a belief system they built around themselves. As this inner pressure increases, their emotional responses may become more intense and unpredictable. They may become more defensive, easily irritated, highly sensitive to criticism, or trapped in repeated thoughts about the situation. The need to protect their image can become stronger because the reality around them is no longer matching the story they have created. They may search for new sources of admiration, try to change the way others view the situation, shift blame, rewrite past events, or attempt to regain a sense of influence. These behaviors often come from the struggle to preserve the version of themselves they feel they must maintain. Beneath the confidence they display, there can be a growing conflict between what they want to believe and what they are being forced to recognize. The person they once expected to remain emotionally available is now standing independently. The reaction they once depended on is no longer there. The control they assumed they had is no longer guaranteed. And when those external supports disappear, the carefully built image can begin to feel unstable. The most revealing part is that silence and distance can expose things that arguments never could. When someone stops chasing, explaining, or seeking approval, the entire dynamic changes. The narcissistic person is no longer receiving the same confirmation that once protected their self-image. They are left facing a reality where another person's growth, independence, and emotional strength cannot be controlled. That realization can become one of the most challenging experiences because it forces them to confront the difference between the image they created and the reality that exists beyond it, revealing weaknesses and emotional wounds they may have spent years trying to hide from themselves and others. If this conversation is helping you understand your own experience and recognize unhealthy relationship patterns, take a moment to support this video by liking and subscribing. It allows more people to discover information that can help them understand difficult relationship dynamics and creates a stronger community focused on awareness and healing. Obsession can begin to replace confidence when a narcissistic person loses the belief that they still have influence over someone they once assumed would always remain emotionally connected. During the relationship, they may have felt certain that they understood the other person's thoughts, reactions, emotions, and future choices. They may have believed that regardless of how much distance appeared, they would still hold an important place in that person's heart and mind. This sense of certainty can create a feeling of power and emotional security because everything feels predictable. But when that certainty disappears, it can create a deep psychological emptiness. The person who stepped away is no longer responding, explaining, arguing, defending, or providing emotional reactions. Instead of receiving proof that they still have importance, the narcissist is left facing silence and unanswered questions. They may begin thinking about what the other person is doing, whether they have truly moved forward, whether someone else has entered their life, or whether they are no longer remembered. The absence of information can become increasingly uncomfortable. Over time, thoughts about the former partner may become more constant and difficult to ignore. They may replay old conversations, analyze past moments, search for hidden meanings, or repeatedly revisit memories trying to understand where their influence disappeared. They may check social media, look for updates through mutual connections, or create explanations in their mind to fill the empty spaces left by uncertainty. What once felt like complete confidence can slowly transform into intense mental focus. The obsession is not always created by deep emotional connection or genuine understanding. Often it is driven by the discomfort of losing access and not knowing what is happening. People naturally want answers and closure, but for someone who depends strongly on control, uncertainty can feel especially disturbing. When they can no longer predict, influence, or reach into another person's emotional world, their confidence can turn into fixation, creating a cycle of repeated thoughts that becomes difficult to break. The idea of replacement often fails because a new relationship cannot automatically heal the emotional struggles and inner conflicts that existed before. Many people assume that when a narcissistic person quickly finds someone new, it means they have completely moved on, forgotten the past, or discovered something better. But often, a new relationship may function more as a temporary source of attention and validation, rather than a true solution to deeper emotional struggles. In the beginning, a new partner may provide admiration, excitement, affection, and constant attention. This can create a strong feeling of relief because it restores many of the things the narcissist feels they have lost. The attention can reassure them that they are still attractive and important. The admiration can strengthen the image they want others to see. The excitement of something new can distract them from feelings of rejection, disappointment, or uncertainty. For some time, everything may appear perfect from the outside, but the deeper patterns usually remain unchanged. The need for approval, the fear of losing influence, the difficulty accepting criticism, and the dependence on outside validation do not disappear simply because another person enters their life. As the relationship becomes more normal and the early excitement begins to fade, the new partner becomes a real person instead of a constant source of admiration. Differences appear, expectations develop, imperfections become visible. And when this happens, the same emotional struggles that existed before may slowly return. The narcissist may begin seeking more reassurance, feeling dissatisfied, or becoming uncomfortable when the new partner no longer provides endless validation. The replacement was expected to remove the pain, but because it only covers the surface and does not address the deeper issues, the relief is often temporary. The unresolved insecurities remain underneath, waiting for another moment to appear when the new source of validation no longer feels enough. Anger and desperation can rise at the same time because both reactions often come from the same painful experience: losing control, losing validation, and losing certainty. When a narcissistic person realizes that someone they once influenced is no longer reacting in familiar ways, it can create a powerful emotional struggle. The anger often comes from facing a reality they did not expect. The person they believed they could affect is now making independent choices. The attention they once counted on is no longer guaranteed. The emotional connection they assumed would always remain available is no longer within their control. This can create feelings of frustration, confusion, and urgency as they attempt to understand why their old methods are no longer working. The more they try to restore the previous dynamic and fail, the stronger the emotional reaction may become. What they are confronting is not only the loss of another person, but the loss of the control and certainty that person represented. And this is the part many people overlook. Sometimes the strongest reaction does not come from losing the relationship itself. It comes from realizing that the other person has reached a place where they can no longer be easily influenced, no longer fitting the reality they expected. The desperation comes from slowly realizing that the usual ways they used to regain influence may no longer have the same effect. These two emotional experiences can happen at the same time, creating a powerful and often confusing pattern of reactions. Anger is usually expressed outwardly. They may accuse the other person, criticize their choices, create negative stories about them, or present themselves as the one who was harmed. This response can protect their self-image because it moves attention away from their own actions and places responsibility on someone else. Accepting that another person has chosen to continue their life independently can feel extremely difficult because it challenges their belief that they are always important, unforgettable, or capable of controlling the connection. But beneath that anger, another emotion may be developing quietly. Desperation can begin growing as they become more focused on finding a way back into the life of the person who left. They may attempt unexpected communication, ask others for information, observe online activity, or search for moments where they can reconnect. These actions are often less about genuine understanding and more about trying to restore a feeling of certainty and reduce the discomfort created by losing access. When anger and desperation continue feeding each other, the emotional pattern can become stronger over time. The more their attempts to regain influence fail, the more frustration can build. The more frustrated they become, the stronger the desire may grow to regain control of the situation. This can create sudden changes in behavior, moving between resentment, memories of the past, blame, charm, emotional appeals, and attempts to repair the connection. Each reaction reflects an internal struggle with accepting a reality that no longer matches what they believed would happen. The deeper crisis is often happening inside because the greatest challenge for a narcissistic person may not simply be losing a relationship. It may be being forced to face parts of themselves that they have avoided for many years. Many narcissistic behaviors can function as protection against painful emotions such as shame, rejection, insecurity, inadequacy, or vulnerability. By focusing on achievement, attention, status, admiration, control, and approval from others, they may keep those uncomfortable feelings hidden beneath the surface. As long as this protective system continues working, there may be little motivation to look deeper. But when an important source of validation disappears, especially when someone walks away and refuses to return to the old dynamic, that protective layer can begin to weaken. The attention, emotional reactions, admiration, and sense of influence they once depended on are no longer available in the same way. Without those external supports, difficult emotions may start becoming harder to avoid. Feelings of loneliness, uncertainty, self-doubt, fear, and insecurity can slowly move closer to awareness. And this is the part many people do not recognize. External achievements or new sources of attention may create temporary comfort, but they cannot completely solve internal struggles. A new relationship, increased admiration, success, or praise may provide a short moment of relief, yet the deeper emotional patterns often remain unchanged. The person may continue searching outside themselves for something that can only be addressed through inner awareness and personal growth. Because of this, an internal conflict can begin to grow stronger. One side wants to continue protecting the image of confidence, superiority, and complete control. The other side is confronted with unresolved emotions and hidden vulnerabilities that can no longer stay completely buried. This battle between appearance and reality creates emotional pressure. The more energy used to protect the image they created, the more exhausting the internal struggle can become. Avoiding self-reflection may keep the pain hidden for a while, but it does not remove the source of that pain. Over time, maintaining the protective identity can become harder because reality continues presenting evidence that challenges it. The most important thing to understand is that when a narcissistic person appears to reach an emotional breaking point, the struggle is rarely only about losing one relationship. It is often connected to losing control, losing certainty, losing admiration, and being forced to face parts of themselves they have worked hard to avoid. What appears on the outside as anger, obsession, blame, searching for replacements, or desperate attempts to regain influence may actually represent a much deeper internal conflict. The breaking point does not begin simply because someone chooses to leave. It begins when the strategies that once protected their self-image stop producing the same results and reality becomes impossible to ignore. For the person who walked away, this carries an important message. Healing is not about proving your worth, seeking revenge, or waiting for another person to finally understand your pain. Healing begins when you choose peace, rebuild your confidence, and stop allowing someone else's inability to change to control your future.